Welcome to the SJ Child Show. This episode is sponsored by Water and Body Basics. Visit 3440 South, 5600 West, West Valley City, Utah. Mention SJ Childs today.
Hi, and welcome to the SJ Childs Show. I'm your host, SJ Childs, and today I have a special guest. I have Robbie Seale. She's coming from Canada. So exciting to have her on here today. We are going to give a big chat out to FASD. We're going to have another discussion about this today because it is so important to talk about. It's 100% preventable. 100%. What does that mean to you? What kind of choices are you going to make differently? What kind of education are you going to give people when you find out the things we're going to talk about today? Hi, Robbie. It's so nice to have you here today.
Hi, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Definitely. I agree. And I'm excited to learn about your life and your programs. AFSD Family Life is it a nonprofit that you run?
FASD Family Life is my podcast.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's a podcast. And I do parent education, staff education, FASD advocacy. But it's just me right now. I don't have it. It's not as a nonprofit yet. We'll see what the next step is.
Hey, absolutely. No, it's always great to, have goals for those things. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started on this journey.
Oh my gosh, I've got decades to tell you about, but let me bring it down nice and short. I was originally, my education was as a child youth care worker. So that's working with children from hard places. So working with children in group care, adolescent treatment centers, that sort of thing. That's what I was trained in. And I did some of that work until I became a parent myself. I also discovered along the way that I wanted to build my family through adoption. So I had one biological child and then deliberately had no more biological children. And then 7 years into her life, then we moved into foster care with the goal to foster to adopt. So we took a little girl into our home with the dream of adopting her. And then later on, we adopted more children. And that's another whole story. But all of my adopted children were prenatally exposed to alcohol and prenatally exposed to trauma. And it's the prenatal exposure to alcohol that can develop a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is a developmental disability. So we'll get into that later. But so I had a little bit of knowledge of kids from trauma. And then when I adopted my own children, and then the wheels began to fall off, as they do in family life, that's when I did the deep dive into understanding fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Yeah, definitely. And it has a lot of, like you said, it's like a big umbrella with so many different things that could fall underneath it. Definitely. Yes. What was the earliest signs, and how did you go about finding out about those fetal alcohol spectrum disorders?
Sure. And this is how fetal alcohol, there's some overlap between what autism can look like and what fetal alcohol can look like. But fetal alcohol spectrum disorder can manifest as primary disabilities that include things like sleep problems, emotional dysregulation, inability to self-regulate, cognitive challenges. Not that oftentimes individuals who have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder have a normal range IQ. They're not low IQ. They can be. It's a spectrum disorder, as is autism. So you can have low IQ all the way up to extraordinarily high. But our kids lack the ability to understand cause and effect. Or to link knowledge from one place to another place. Those are some of the things. Also, very high cortisol levels, they're very quick to become aggressive or agitated or to become overwhelmed are some of the things. So those are the things that you start to see in your kids. Sometimes it's delayed development. The sneaky thing about FASD is oftentimes, not always, but often the infant and preschool years are your golden years. So you may not even know. Yeah, you might not even know. And it's when your kids kind of get into elementary school and they start falling behind and they start failing in school or having social problems. That's when you go, there's something here.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. We have a little bit of the same experiences like we had talked about in our family, and finding out years later through now understanding a little bit more. It's incredible when you are in those early years and you don't, like for our first baby, our first biological child, we he was our first biological child. Like we had raised my husband's daughter, so I knew exactly what that looked like. But we had this quiet, perfect baby. That's all we thought.
Lucky
And so,
you.
yeah, right. Until he's kept being quiet and didn't ever talk. And now he is verbal now as you got to meet him, but it was nonverbal till he was almost 4. And so, yeah, a lot of things you don't know. You don't know when you don't know. So
You don't know. But you get with autism, sometimes you get those early clues. And I know often physicians will put you off. No, it's fine. You're just a
So
worried
true.
mother. You're just a worried mother. But I know with autism, my experience has been that mom or dad has mom or dad has an inkling. Something's not right. Something is not right. Like my child isn't making eye contact. My child isn't responding the way other children might respond, and we don't know. And we don't often get the recognition and the support from the physicians. With FASD, you may not even know. Like they might meet their diet, they may meet their milestones on time. They may be just slightly delayed, but it's that gap that shows up a little bit later. And again, it's a spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
And like autism, very few people with FASD have any facial or physical indicators that there's anything wrong. That there's no hint that there's a disability. It's less than 10% of people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder that have any face dysmorphic characteristics. And that's because those facial dysmorphic characteristics only happen on one or 2 days during pregnancy, right? So if there's alcohol consumption intake on those 1 or 2 days, you may have a facial feature because that's when face is developing. But if there's no alcohol then you don't have that face dysmorphic features, but you still have the impact on the brain and the body.
Yeah.
Because we know when alcohol
almost harder to know, right?
It's harder to know because there's no clue.
Exactly.
And yet you have this person who looks absolutely typical, yet they have a brain that does not function the way a healthy brain would.
Yeah.
And that's because the alcohol in utero passes through the placenta, passes right into the fetus at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if I'm drinking 5 ounces of alcohol, my baby is having 5 ounces of alcohol.
Oh, man.
Only my baby might be this big and have no liver.
Right.
Have no liver. So cells, just like our brain cells can be killed by alcohol, our body cells are damaged by alcohol, but we have a liver and we've got a big body and lots of blood to be able to dilute some of the effects of the alcohol, filter it. These babies don't. So cells are killed, cells are destroyed, cells are, as they are to be migrating to other parts of the body as they're splitting and migrating, they may not migrate to where they're supposed to go.
Yeah.
So, and we know now through brain science that brains develop from the bottom up and inside out simultaneously, like bottom and inside out. So those early alcohol exposures, and how many women, me included, have an unplanned pregnancy?
Yeah.
Right. And might be drinking alcohol, right? Like
exactly.
Been there, done that. Like how many women have an unplanned pregnancy and might be drinking alcohol? You're not an alcoholic, but you're drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
If you're young and in college, you might be binging. You might be in your 30s and having a good time with your ladies' night out. And or what if you're 45 and you think you're past that stage?
Exactly.
And then you're having a good time. You're having and then there's an unplanned pregnancy. So it can happen to anybody.
Yes,
and
definitely.
So in those early days, early weeks before we know, this brain and body are being developed. And so there can be damage to that brain and body from very early on. And so if mom finds out, when a woman finds out she's pregnant and stops drinking, fantastic. Bravo. That's exactly what we need to do.
Yes.
To limit the exposure. But, if only all pregnancies were planned.
Yeah, right.
Or if only we all knew that alcohol could damage babies, because a lot of women just don't know that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when a woman goes to a doctor to screen for a pregnancy, the doctor will ask, okay, do you smoke? Do you use cigarettes? Do you use drugs? And mom says, no. Oftentimes doctors don't screen for alcohol. So then how's the mom to know?
Yeah.
So, it's a disability, different, but not together dissimilar from autism.
Yeah, definitely.
Only there's so much stigma with it because we can blame the birth mother, but really, if we knew better, we would do better.
Yeah. And definitely no one wants to be out there blaming or being blamed. Right. And even like I had asked you, I mean, how would I know? What if my children, I don't consume alcohol all day, every day on a regular basis. But yes, I've drank. And what if I did do it that week before I knew I was pregnant? Like what kind of testing how would I take my child to get tested?
It would be likely, I would presume, similar to an autism test. Like you would go to a childhood clinic, you would go to an autism clinic, wouldn't you? Where it's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, an FASD diagnosis is how do they call it? A multidisciplinary diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So is it the same for autism? So you have a speech pathologist, you have a physiotherapist.
Team.
A whole team.
Not a one-stop shop, for sure.
Yeah. You go to a psychologist, you have a developmental pediatrician, you have all these people. That's the testing. And similar, like you have all these psychoeducational checklists that you check off first as a parent. The key here is, was there alcohol exposure?
Yeah.
And so that's the criteria. Well, that's one of the criteria needed for a diagnosis. Also, they test in Canada. They cross over 10 different brain domains for testing, and there has to be an impairment in, I think, 3 or 4 of those, a significant impairment, 3 or 4 of those brain domains with confirmed alcohol use for there to be an FASD diagnosis. So sometimes children, let's say mom doesn't know, mom isn't asked, like let's say you weren't asked if there was alcohol exposure and it looks like autism, so we test for autism. But what if we asked, there was some alcohol exposure early on, now we factor that into the diagnosis. Okay, is it FASD with a co-occurring autism? Is it FASD? Is it autism? So, but if it isn't asked, we don't know. And oftentimes too, children who and you don't have to be an alcoholic to have a child impacted by it. Of
course.
You don't. It isn't just like I had somebody, when I queried somebody potentially having FASD very gently, but they said, well, my mom wasn't blind drunk, like she wasn't a blind drunk. And I'm like, that's not what it is.
Exactly.
It isn't only the binging. It isn't only the alcoholic mother. It's any one of us who
just the consumption.
Because we don't know if at this point, there is no safe amount and no safe time.
Right.
And that's the important thing to know, and I mean, so any one of us is at risk of having a child with FASD.
Now, with you having adopted children, is there a more due diligence put on those adoption agencies to do blood testing, to do kind of work or know these types of things? Interesting.
No. What we all rely upon when you foster your children or adopt your children, and this applies to public adoptions like state adoptions or private adoptions. It all comes down to 2 things. It's down to the due diligence of the adoption agency to even know about fetal alcohol, and they may not.
Yeah.
Foster and foster social workers may not know about FASD because it is really important to know that they don't learn about this in university.
Yeah.
Well, here they come serving these children in vulnerable places, and they don't even know
without all the knowledge.
Yeah. And FASD is not a minor thing. There is FASD. I think if Natalie was on your show previously, she would have shared with your listeners too, that fetal alcohol spectrum disorder impacts 5% of the United States population.
Yeah.
That's more than autism, Down syndrome, and cerebral palsy all combined.
Wow.
So like however many children there are with autism, 2.5 times that have fetal alcohol. And those are just the ones we know about.
That is crazy.
It's not a lot.
Yeah, and it's a ridiculous amount. I think we had talked about it was like 1 in 12.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy.
It is.
It's and those are the ones we know about. So let's say, there's children who've been diagnosed with autism, but the clinicians didn't ask, was there prenatal exposure? Right. And so that's a biomoms, but also then if children have been taken into care or relinquished into adoption care, and let's say there's a birth mom who's pursuing a private adoption, is she aware that alcohol could negatively impact her baby? Probably not. Also, if she's relinquishing her child to adoption, she wants the best possible home for her child. So she may be hesitant to disclose that she drank alcohol.
Absolutely.
Because she wants somebody to love her baby and take her baby.
Oh, that's so sad.
Right. So then what happens is the adoption agency doesn't know that there's alcohol exposure. And the adoptive parents don't know there's an alcohol exposure. And then they take this baby who they love and adore. And as time goes on, they're like, something's not right. But they don't have the information they don't have the golden key that would unlock the mystery of, is there FASD here?
Yes.
Although over time you can get testing done based on, like autism, based on the behavioral characteristics.
Yes, exactly.
You can get this looks like an FASD, but I don't believe you can get an FASD diagnosis without confirmed maternal
like
alcohol
proof, right?
Proof.
And what about blood testing in the prenatal section of this? So I guess not prenatal, but in the postnatal. Yeah. What can they do to maybe better support or get services for these families? Is there testing that can be done right away?
I don't know that would be more of a public health question.
Yeah.
And, because I know like they take little neonates and they prick their little heels and they do a little blood test and it's screening for a lot of different things. I don't think that FASD is something that they screen for.
That sounds ridiculous. I don't know why they wouldn't, right?
But I don't know if it would show up in a blood test.
Yeah. Interesting.
Autism? Right.
No.
Autism doesn't show up. This doesn't show up because it's a brain-based disorder.
Okay. So the alcohol has obviously left the blood system or the bloodstream, unless it was used very recently before the birth, possibly,
babies,
or something.
Yeah,
okay.
Babies may be tested if there's a suspicion, right? Then the babies may be tested for
that makes sense.
Drug use, alcohol use. But I don't know if there's a blood. I guess, there's a blood test to see if you're inebriated. So I suppose, but I don't know that there's
that makes more sense now, though. I didn't really consider the effect of having it already out of the bloodstream, but have affected the cells the way it does.
Right.
So, wow,
that looks unique. Like in these little babies, it looks like if they have the physical characteristics, they're preterm, but they're preterm for a lot of different reasons. Maybe mom is smoking. Maybe mom is a polydrug user. So she's using alcohol and drugs and smoking. Maybe she has a high risk lifestyle. Maybe she has high trauma. Maybe she has poor prenatal care. So all these things are contributing factors to low birth weight, early preterm birth, all these things. But certainly alcohol exposure on its own will also lead to those things.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a really complex social issue, and one that is so under-recognized globally, really, like Canada, US, all across the globe. It's prevalent everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, what a big subject to cover. It seems a little overwhelming, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Let's focus back onto your family and kind of what was, like you said, it was more school or socially that you started to notice. What kind of services were you able to get then? What does that look like?
Okay. They ask, I've been asked recently about navigating the systems, right? System navigation. You've probably heard that word, system navigation. And when I was first asked that question, I said, what system? There is no system. That, one social worker, doesn't know about services, or one service provider knows what they do, but they don't know what the next service provider does. And so, within the hierarchy of medical, you know what I mean? There's gaps. And within the medical model, they have their systems, but they forget to tell us parents. They know there's a map, but we don't know what it is.
Exactly.
And it's the same, right? It's the same with, it wasn't until my children were 14, 14, and 11 that I found out about occupational therapy.
Wow.
What the hell was going on?
Right.
How did I not know that occupational therapy could make a big difference? I knew about occupational therapy in the context of working with geriatrics.
Yeah.
I've worked with geriatrics before and with dementia patients. I knew the role there. I had no idea. But it wasn't until my kids, like we were in crisis again.
Yes.
With my kids being 14, 14, and 11, that OT can so that's what I'm talking about. Systems. What the hell? It's all about parent navigation. And so when like I said, the wheels were falling off our family, we had 3 crises happening simultaneously, because isn't that how it happens?
Oh, right.
So I had my first adopted child at that point was 14, and she had begun to, without my knowledge, of course, begun to use alcohol and drugs in the community. And she's a good kid. Like, this is a really, really good kid. And the only places she went was school, home, and to 2 different friends' houses. That's like, and horseback riding, mom would take her to horseback. This was a really good kid. But somewhere in those freedoms of walking to and from school or having permission to go to that really good friend's house, alcohol came into play. And with prenatal alcohol exposure already, with her birth family having generational histories of addiction. We know now that epigenetics comes into play,
Of course.
and she was instantly addicted.
Yeah.
And so at 14 years old, I lost my daughter into addiction. Simultaneously, my 6-year-old girls who had done really nicely in preschool and kindergarten, and they were sweet little monkeys. Twins is like raising chimpanzees anyways, but it's a little funny, but grade 1, all of a sudden I get word in November when you have just before your first parent teacher, your girls are failing. Okay, simultaneously, it is the month after my first one is lost into addiction. She's moved herself into homelessness. I'm trying to contact the police. I'm trying to find the systems to help. And then the very next month, my girls are failing. My twins are failing school, and they don't know what's happening with the other. My mom is stressed out, but they don't know.
Yeah.
Mom, I'm trying to insulate them from what's happening. So they're not failing because of crisis at home. They're failing because they can't read. They can't follow.
Because school isn't giving them the right type of support.
It was a really crowded, there was 27 kids in a grade 1 classroom in a portable. Who is going to learn in that environment anyway?
Right.
Simultaneously, my then 3-year-old was off the charts with ADHD. I go to and I know he was drug exposed, and I know he was alcohol exposed, and I know he had no prenatal care. I know that because he is the half brother of my twins. So I have an open adoption with a family. So I know more of his history. So I know he was an at-risk baby anyway. So lots of a medically fragile baby, of course, let's throw that in there too.
Yeah. Right.
Let's just throw that in. But one is I'm losing one, and I'm trying desperately not to. 2 are failing. Then the third one at the same time is ADHD off the chart. And so I go back to the pediatrician and say, I need some strategies. Everything I know before isn't working. I need strategies. Meanwhile, he's 3. He's climbing over me, around me. I'm the monkey bars. He's under me. Now he's on the examining table, and he's like the size of a 1.5-year-old. He's really tiny. And he's up and down and over thing. And we're talking, but she's looking at him doing all this climbing. And she's like, he needs medication for ADHD. Oh, okay. I didn't want to go there at 3 years old. I wanted strategies, but if his brain needs that, then his brain needs that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really quite something. We put him on a low dose for ADHD medication, and he was, for the first time in our lives, we could see him settle down and play.
Yeah.
Instead of flit from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, he could settle down and play. And it was beautiful. We got to see the glimpse of who he is, his character and his personality. So that was really sweet.
Yeah.
But with my daughter falling into addiction so suddenly, and I know the birth history of addiction, and like I said, in her family and her birth mother's life. So I knew her susceptibility. And then when my girl's failing, that's when I'm like, okay, red flag, red flag, red flag. And that's when at the school level for my twins, I said to them, can we please get a psychoeducational evaluation done? Because my kids are going to need intervention. And they're like, no. We don't test that in grade 1. Yeah, we don't do that in grade 1 because to determine a learning disability, I'm sure you have had this experience. To determine a learning disability, you have to be 2 years behind.
Oh my goodness.
2 years behind in grade 1.
Yeah.
Except they're failing. And I said, well, then let's hold them back. Okay, if they're failing, I get that. It's only October, late October. Let's put them back into kindergarten. Let's just put them back so that they can build up the foundation, and then we can move on. No, we don't do that. And we're not going to do it psychoeducational. So those are the systems of navigation. Those are the systems.
Goodness.
And so I'll let the weekend go and let, the blood stop boiling, and to think, okay, what's the next strategy? And then I called back the principal and I said, look, my girls have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. They are at risk of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We need to get the psychoeducational evaluation done.
Mm-hmm.
At which he said, you're right.
Good.
Done. But this was October.
You have to go to the right chain of command.
The right person, but I needed the right words. And parents, don't we need that? We have to speak the right language to leverage the support. But how are we to know what the right language is? But I asked for that in October of grade 1. The assessments were scheduled for March of grade 2.
What?
So we lost grade 1. We lost grade 2. By the time grade 2 came along, my girls had a lot more ripped up paper in their desks than they had anything else because they couldn't track. They
Yeah.
couldn't even, my girls were sitting in the front row of the classroom and they couldn't, like, they could read if they read, they couldn't read, but they were supposed to copy what was on the board onto the piece of paper. Well, first of all, they can't read, hello, but they can't copy that because that's a lot of different brain domains, including working memory, which is a primary disability of FASD.
Yes.
So, it would be like I'm trying to copy Hebrew from the board. Like it's just squiggles. I don't know what it is.
Exactly.
Right? That's what it would be like. They don't okay, I'll write this, but I don't know what I'm doing. So these poor kids, by the time grade 2 even came around, they were so sick the first week of school with anxiety. It was crazy.
I bet. Yeah.
So that's that year of my one falling into addiction and working so hard to save her and to change her trajectory, my failing school, my little guy with ADHD. That's when I was like desperate looking for help. And I had to ask a lot of different people in the community. And finally, somebody threw me a life jacket. And it was an agency in the city here. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta. And it was an agency called Catholic Social Services. And they had a program for families raising children with or suspected of having fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And it was a beautiful program. And they served the biological families if they were raising their children, or if it was the grandparents raising, or in my case, an adoptive parent raising.
Yeah.
And they would teach you about fetal alcohol in a support group setting. That was more for cross sharing, but they would also assign you an individual coach, a parent coach.
Nice.
Who would walk with you and sit with you as you cry for 18 months and teach you what is this.
Wow.
And they would help you.
Bravo to them,
Bravo
Catholic,
to Catholic
services.
Services.
Holy moly, the entire world needs to take take a seat of
because
this.
we need hand holding, right? Like autism is such a complex disability.
100%.
And there's some state recognition of it and some school board recognition of it. FASD isn't recognized, so oftentimes, and there's not legislation for it. And some schools have it in their training manual, like how to teach a child with FASD, but our teachers aren't trained.
Yeah.
Like they're not trained in teacher college or in university how to spot FASD. And yet, if you were in a classroom of 25 kids, at least one of them, statistically, at least one or two of them are going to have an FASD.
Interesting. Do you know if RAD or reactive attachment disorder also falls within those kind of same parameters?
Well, if it's a different diagnosis based on a different series of events, but it certainly can be co-occurring, because children with FASD, 80% statistics say that 80% of children with FASD do not live with their birth families.
Yeah.
So then we have attachment disruptions too,
Yes.
which has a profound impact on the brain and body of an individual.
Yes.
And so if you've got prenatal alcohol exposure and you have attachment disruptions, you're going to have, you may have a RAD as well. And the other thing too is the brain development of this baby. Like I like how Dr. Ross Green talks about it when he talks about connecting with a child and being able to have a relationship with a child. I think it's Dr. Ross Green talks about this. I could be wrong. It could be Dr. Ira Chasnoff.
Either one.
They talk about like the child has a role in attachment too. The child, like this, when you had your baby and they looked at your eyes and you smiled at them and they smiled at you, that's the baby's role in the attachment game, because their brain is coding and you're teaching them how to respond. You're teaching them how to connect. You're teaching them how to self-regulate. But if your baby is unable to because they have autism, your baby is unable to because they've had disrupted attachment or because they've been prenatally with alcohol, then their brain is unable to participate in their role of the attachment.
Yeah.
So let's say there isn't even a disruption in the attachment. Let's say baby is with birth mom or grandma, let's say, but their brain is unable to do their part of the attachment. We're still going to have attachment problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Because if it's brain based.
Yeah. Oh, these poor kiddos. If I could just hug the whole world, bring all the children in, right? In one big hug. I think that we would all do that definitely as a community. I really love how that you found that. And one important part that I always tell families searching for support is keep searching. If you don't find what you're looking for, keep looking. Don't stop for one doctor's diagnosis that you don't agree with or whatever it is. Keep looking, because it wasn't until we didn't settle on our first or second therapist, it wasn't until the third one came in and was so delightful and so helpful, not only with our son, but then she turned around and said, okay, now here's what you can do. Here's your first steps. Here's how you understand autism. Here's how you start to interact.
Yes.
And without those early building blocks, without that, you know, what is the word I'm looking for? You know, giving her, advising us on what to do.
Educating
we
you.
were just walking in the dark. You know, we were literally walking in the dark, and she shone a light on it.
Yeah. And you made
I wish
things
that
worse.
I did make her stay in my life for 18 months after that. She wasn't required to. No, but now we're still friends, you know, 11 years later, and we're, well, 10 or, you know, 9 or 10 years later, we're still very close, and we keep her up to date on things going on with him, and she can see the progress and all of that.
And things change with our kids too, you know, like what you're working on with a 2-year-old or 4-year-old with autism or FASD is different than what you're working on with your 8-year-old, which is different than, and you know, like you've kind of get something settled, and then all of a sudden the world shakes a little bit, or your world shakes a little bit, and then things are different, or the kids just are moving into different developmental, or you kind of get something kind of settled down, and then a new behavior pops up.
Yeah.
You know, and but it's all brain based. We can't take a behavior modification approach like a typical family could, where, you know, you praise the good and you punish the bad. And then the kid learns. Our kids won't, I don't know about autism, but I know FASD, our kids won't learn from those experiences.
No, we have to do lots of different strategies. Like you just said, lots of different strategies.
We have to prevent the unwanted behaviors primarily.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And, you know, some of the ways that we found to do that is through our language that we speak directly to our child. We learned right away that no, stop, don't, can't, don't, you know, all of those things would send him into the freak out spiral, scream out. And so we thought, okay, we can help this, you know, let's use different language. We don't have to yell, stop, don't, no, can't, all of those. You can say, hey, let's find a better way to shut that door. Let's, you know, let's do this. And you make it happy and fun. Well, we finally got on board, but it's hard to teach your other family members, like grandparents and things like that, that are or siblings. Exactly. They're so kind of in their own way of living that, okay, now you have to just stop all the way you've been talking to everybody else and talk to this person differently.
Yeah. And it looks like you're coddling, and it looks like you're just giving in to this child who just hit you, or this child who just slammed the door, or this child just stomped up the stairs. But that's very similar to FASD, you know, so often. And all of us parents with FASD have gone to the experts to go, why does no cause a meltdown? Why does no throw my kid into like, holy cow, a bomb just went off? And it's very hard to explain that.
Yeah.
And it took
control. That's what we realized it was with our 9-year-old. It was the amount of control when she felt out of control, it was gone. There was no more understanding. She was past the point. She couldn't even have a regular conversation, but we give her a teeny bit of control to have for herself. She's got that. She can control it. She's on top. She can handle it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So as far as like, that's what we have to do. We have to kind of relinquish our control, relinquish. I don't know. I just said some made up word there. Relinquish, rather.
Relinquish.
Relinquish. Hey, you know, I'm great at wordsmith. I'll just make it up. Yeah. And so we had to, and for adults, that's hard. Okay. Yeah. No parent wants to say, yes, I let my kid yell at me, or yes, I don't punish that kid for doing this thing, because you and I know that punishment is going to make the rest of the week bad. It's they're not going to learn. They're going to learn that they're going to react. So it's the more like, okay, this is this situation. What decision do you think you would have your friend make? And we give it back to her and give her like different options to think of, you know, and so sometimes that gives them a little bit more control and not feeling, I'm, you know, I have no control in this. I've lost, you know, I can't even, she can't even hear anything.
Well, and that's brain based. Yeah. And that's totally brain based. Like for us, I don't know that it's control, although it could be. For us, it's more like a child comes in to ask something, and because our kids have this rigid thinking, similar to autism, right?
Yes.
Rigid thinking. They foresee one outcome,
Yes.
and it is the
Yes.
desirable outcome. And then if they have not played it out in their head that there's all these other outcomes. So there's going to
Exactly.
be one outcome. I am asking to play Fortnite, and of course my mom will say yes. And when I say no Fortnite,
Yes.
blow up. Mom, you hate me. Mom, you're mean. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Am I in your kitchen right now?
100%.
Can I have pop? Can I have pop? And I'm like, no. You've had enough sugar. But if I say no, boom.
Yeah.
But if I say, well, I have enough sugar today. Oh,
Yeah.
it's more like what I'm going to get. And I'm like, you're so mean to me. And then they walk off. Say what you want, do what I say. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so we just learned that's me anyways. There's a lot they say that I don't pick up.
Yeah.
And recently in
Good
OT.
for you.
Well,
Right?
hasn't always been that way, my friend.
Yeah,
I've got 30 years
sure.
of experience. My oldest is going to be 30 soon. So I've got lots of practice in doing things one way. And now I'm trying to do things another way.
Yeah.
But, I don't have to react. And an OT that we were working with, and I kept her around for 18 months too, by the way. Of contract. And and it was a godsend. But she taught me something. She said, Robbie, you don't have to pick up every bomb they throw at you. Right?
True.
Like it's like you're playing ping pong. They say this, you say that, you back and forth. And she goes, what if you just stepped aside and let the ball hit the floor?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an option.
I love that
okay.
analogy.
Okay. So my son frequently, because, he has a capacity, but his developmental capacity he has an age, his developmental capacity is half that age. And if he's mad, I think it drops by half again.
Agreed.
I'm not a scientist. I'm a mom. And that's what it looks like to me. And so why am I going to argue with a 3-year-old who goes, you hate me? What if I don't say anything? And then later on can come back and still have an attachment moment with him and not even talk about that.
Yeah.
And, so.
I love that because us as parents and adults, don't we all sometimes we stick to our principles too much, and it's not the same for kids. We give them, we have these adult expectations for children without life experience to have any kind of reaction to it.
Yeah.
I just think that's a learning experience we all have to realize, right? We all have to be like, oh my gosh, why am I arguing back and forth with this child about something? I didn't need to be in this argument.
But I also have to understand that they don't see it the way I see it.
Yeah.
And for them, I just recently had this epiphany, where, if my kid is coming into me like, Mom, can I have pizza? Remember, will you order pizza for supper? Like, no, I'm not. I actually have a routine, and I don't say all this, but for your benefit, Monday, spaghetti, meatball, Tuesday, Taco Tuesday, Wednesdays, chicken, Thursday, I have a routine because it stabilizes. It's boring as anything, but it stabilizes. But he runs in, can we have pizza? And I say, no, tonight we're having, or you know what? Tonight we're having, because no is that trigger word. So spaghetti meatballs. It's your favorite. We're having spaghetti meatballs. But you know what it feels like to him if I just say no? It feels like he has just run full tilt into a glass wall.
Yeah.
He's just run full tilt into the patio doors he didn't see there. That's what it feels like, I think. This is my new aha moment with the way our kids' brains work. They have this expectation. And this other OT taught me this too, is when you have a request and an expectation, your pleasure center of your brain is activated too. Mm. And so your pleasure center is activated. And so to have that denied, it feels very abrupt. Mm. So I shared recently on a podcast, if I really want chocolate and I ask somebody for chocolate and they don't give it to me, I have to use a lot of my upstairs brain to negotiate that disappointment. Because as soon as I said chocolate, literally my mouth is watering.
Right? You and me both. I'm like, I don't have anything in a room.
I see the magic word and my mouth is watering.
Yeah.
So now I have to use all of my upstairs brain and all of my adult executive functioning capacities to accept the fact that you said no.
Right.
And still be in relationship with you. Instead of going like, what the fuck?
Exactly. Right? Where's my chocolate?
Excuse my language, but that's if I don't have an upstairs brain, that's what's going to happen. So I kind of share that on my podcast, or even to say, let's say you're in a relationship and you want to have intimacy, you want to have sex with your partner, and they say no. Well, they can react with their fight, flight, freeze, or they have to use their upstairs brain because they want something. It's a physical need, and they have their pleasure center activated. And then we say no, or somebody says no. It's like running into this this glass wall we didn't see.
Yeah.
And when I kind of started like, how would I feel? And I've run into a glass wall. Have you ever run into
Yes.
a patio door? Run down to the screen and cut your nose? Like I've done, like, hello, chaos. I bring it with me.
Exactly.
But we've all had that experience. But then when I realized that for my kid, I'm like, oh, that's what it's like. Okay. And as parents, aren't we the keepers of the kingdom? Like it's all up to us.
Yeah.